Hi, and welcome to the Hotline Show for Gay Liberation Network, a Chicago LGBT activist organization. My name's Danielle Karczewski, and I'm here today with Camilla Taylor. She's the senior staff attorney for the Midwest Regional Offices of Lambda Legal. Hi, Camilla. Welcome
Hi,
to
well,
the
thanks
show.
so much for having me on here.
Thank you for being here. We're here today to talk a bit about the oral arguments that were heard at the California Supreme Court about Proposition 8. In case you haven't heard yet, Proposition 8 was the voter initiative that passed on November that allowed the people of California to overturn the ruling that allowed same-sex marriage in California. So we're here today to talk a little bit about what we saw in the hearings and then what we're looking for as we wait for a decision. First things first, there's been a lot of talk about what people think is going to happen, people who've read the judges and tried to make a prediction about what they saw. Your thoughts about what we think we're going to hear once the decision is issued?
I think it's very difficult to read the tea leaves from the oral argument. The judges were clearly engaged. They were asking a lot of questions. A lot of those were very tough questions, and yet they don't necessarily mean one thing or another about how the court will come down, because often you can be very encouraged about how oral argument went and then get a loss, or you can feel that you didn't do a terribly good job or that the justices weren't really hearing you, and yet nevertheless you get a win. I think what is clear is that it's obviously a case that they're considering very carefully, and that they do have a lot of tough questions remaining even after the huge volume of briefing that was submitted, and that we have to continue with the work for equality, the legal work, the grassroots work, and so on. We can't make any assumptions.
There are a couple of things I know from myself watching the hearings in the internet forum that I was wondering about. There's a lot of talk about whether or not we're looking at a revision or an amendment of the California State Constitution. I'm wondering if you could clarify a little bit about what the difference between those two things is and why it's important in this case.
That's absolutely right, Danielle. There was, when the ballot initiative process was originally added as a manner for making changes to the Constitution in California, and what we're talking about is the state constitution here. The earliest cases to consider the constitutionality of attempts to make changes to the California Constitution made clear that there are two processes for amending the Constitution. There's the amendment process, and then there's the revision process. And you can amend the Constitution through a ballot initiative, but you can't revise it. And the distinction is that a revision goes to something very fundamental. It makes a very big change to the nature of rights guaranteed and protected by the California Constitution. So the question in this case is whether Proposition 8, which defines marriage in a way that excludes gay and lesbian couples, and thereby takes marriage away from gay and lesbian couples in the future, despite the wonderful marriage case, whether that constituted an amendment or a revision. If it's an amendment, then the ballot initiative process is okay. If it's a revision, it needed to be passed by the legislature by a supermajority vote, and it wasn't. So it is invalid if it is a revision.
All right. If anyone has any questions or comments for Camilla on the show, the number here in the studio is 312-738-1060. Our phone lines are open. My next question, Kenneth Starr made some really interesting arguments, I thought, about what the people have a right to do in terms of self-governance. Were there any sort of glaring holes that you personally saw in his arguments during the hearings?
Well, I think, it's hard to define holes when the whole thing has no foundation and is so faulty. But the main problem was that the equal protection guarantee itself is a counter-majoritarian principle. I mean, what it says is that the majority can't single out and target a particular minority and take rights away from those people in particular. We have an equal protection guarantee so that courts can stand as a bulwark, against the tyranny of the majority against a minority. And what is at the core of this case is, what is the meaning of the equal protection guarantee if all it takes is a simple majority vote to target a historically discriminated against minority? Does it have meaning at all? And that's why we had the benefit of so many wonderful amici, including representatives, organizations that represent all sorts of diverse communities, from the NAACP to the preeminent organizations representing women, to MALDEF, which represents Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. So there are all sorts of organizations that understood that if the gay community can be targeted for the taking away of certain fundamental rights, then everyone is vulnerable.
Right.
And that, I think, is really what is wrong with Ken Starr's argument, his failure to appreciate the magnitude of what was at stake.
It sounds like we have our first caller on the line. You're on the air.
Hi. I have a question about same-sex adoption.
Sure.
Yeah, I was wondering if a couple has a child together and the relationship dissolves, is it still possible for that the other partner to still adopt the child from the biological mother?
Well, there are a number of issues there that we can sort of unpeel. But here in Illinois, if a couple decides to have a child together, they can perform what's called a second parent adoption, or they can adopt jointly, so that they both will have a legal tie to the child, and the child is protected. The child's relationship to both parents is protected. Now, if they haven't performed a second parent adoption, and then the couple breaks up, the party that is not biologically related to the child and that doesn't have an adoptive relationship to the child will have a very difficult time, will have a lot of challenges trying to assert a parent-child relationship in court. And if people are encountering those problems, we really hope that you will give us a call. We have a help desk at Lambda Legal where we can put you together with resources or give you legal assistance for your specific problem.
Great, thank you, caller. Do we have another call? You're on the air? Hi, you're on the air.
Yes, I was wondering when the decision is going to be made in California for same-sex marriages.
That's a very good question. Actually, California is one of those rare courts that has a 90-day self-imposed deadline for issuing decisions that goes from the date of submission, which in this case is the date of oral argument. So it's 90 days from March 5th, and the court must rule within that time. Very soon.
Very soon. And this would be a good time, I think, to mention a day of decision action that will be going on in Chicago as well as around the country in different cities. It's partially sponsored by Gay Liberation Network, and on the day of decision, whatever day that will be, there's going to be some sort of action, either a protest or a celebration at 7 p.m. in front of the center on Halstead. We're hoping that it will be a celebration, but whatever it is, whether it's a good or bad thing we have to talk about, we need to have as much turnout as we can. We have to either show that our uproar over a big loss, or we need to show that we seriously appreciate the courts doing the right thing and that we expect this to continue around the country. We have to not sort of sit on our laurels and be happy and not active about it. We need to make sure that we have a resounding celebration or a resounding protest, depending on which way this thing goes. Another action that's happening is an anti-war and anti-occupation action tomorrow at noon. This is being sponsored by a whole host of activist organizations in Chicago against the occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan and Palestine. If you're interested in being a part of this tomorrow, it's taking place at noon. Right off the Pink Line stop at Marshall Boulevard in Cermak. Again, just a couple blocks off the Pink Line. We're gathering at noon, and then there will be a march through the city. Again, that's tomorrow at noon at Marshall and Cermak. Getting back to Proposition 8. As far as precedent goes in this case, I've heard a lot of argument about what can be used as precedent, whether there is a precedent for a case like this. What cases are the courts looking at right now in order to help them make their final decision here?
Well, there are very few cases that interpret what constitutes an amendment or a revision under the California Constitution. There are about 4 main ones, and then there are a few others that are helpful in elucidating some aspects of that. But there is no case that involves the targeting of a particular group to deny them equal protection, to take away something that the court has already considered to be an a fundamental right that is protected under both the equal protection and due process guarantees of the California Constitution. That has never happened before.
Looks like we have another caller. You're on the air.
Good evening. If they allow same-sex marriage, this is the problem. What if a person of the Mormon faith decide, hey, I want to have more than one wife? And there's people that sit back and rationalize and say, well, they can help in the raising of the children, be much more family income. Because once you open up that floodgate, it can open up some other problems. What happens if some guys say, hey, I want to marry my donkey or something like that?
We hear this argument a lot. We've sometimes heard it in courts, but more often you hear it outside of court. It's the notion that somehow if you allow same-sex couples to marry, that this will give ammunition to polygamists. And there's no connection between marriage for same-sex couples and polygamy. First of all, if you strike the ban on marriages for same-sex couples, all you're doing is eliminating a discriminatory provision that was written into the law in Illinois here in 1998, for example, and you change no other aspect of Illinois law. All you're taking out is the gender requirement, this initial restriction. Whereas in the case of polygamy, there are all sorts of governmental interests that would be completely different. There would be issues with respect to consent. How do you tell who has to consent in order for another spouse to be added to the marriage? How do presumptions of parenthood work? Who is presumed to be a parent of a child born into the marriage? With marriage between a same-sex or a different-sex couple, there's a presumption of parenthood that applies for any child that's born there. And then there are all sorts of benefits questions. How do you determine who should get spousal benefits? There would be hundreds, if not thousands, of laws that would have to change in order to accommodate polygamy. So it's a completely different question, and it really has no relationship to marriage equality for same-sex couples.
Thank you, Camilla. That was, I think, a wonderful answer to that particular question. One thing that I've been wondering about is what's the difference between what the courts are deciding now versus what they decided in May when they allowed same-sex marriage in the first place? What makes this so different?
That's an excellent question. The question that was posed to the court in May was, does the California Constitution guarantee the right to marry for same-sex couples on the same terms that everybody else enjoys the fundamental right to marry? Does that fundamental right to marry apply to everyone, or does it apply only to heterosexual people? And the California court answered that with a resounding promise of equality for everybody. And that was particularly noteworthy coming from the California court, which actually was the first court in the nation to strike down a ban on interracial marriage. But the question that was posed just recently in the Prop 8 ballot fight was a procedural question. And it was, did Prop 8 meet the requirements of the California Constitution for a revision to the California Constitution? And it didn't.
I think we have another caller on the line. Just a moment. I think we're going to take just a second. All right. We do have a caller. You're on the air.
Hi. Actually, I had a question, like on a national level, with the new president in office. What can be done, or what can we do as voters, or what should we expect from? It's kind of a loaded question, but what can we expect from like the new administration to do to help the gay marriage cause?
Well, I think we should continue to put the pressure on all levels of government to be more embracing of equality, and that we need to look for results, not just people, soliciting contributions from our community or saying things that suggest that they are equality-minded and then not actually following through. So it's time for us to keep on the pressure and not get complacent. And I think you make a very good point about looking for tangible things post-election. And there are all sorts of ways that the federal government can do very meaningful things to guarantee equality, from recognizing parent-child relationships, as a previous caller mentioned, between the same-sex parent to a child who may not have been able to create an adoptive relationship but has acted in reality as a parent from day one of a child's existence. We could look for employment non-discrimination legislation to be passed and for a real commitment to that. And we also, of course, need to look for an end to the ban on gay service members in the military.
That's something I think that Barack Obama actually talked about taking care of towards the beginning of his time in office, isn't it?
Well, he's definitely made commitments with regard to that. And I think it's up to us to make sure that that happens sooner rather than later.
Right. Let's say the worst happens and Proposition 8 is upheld by the courts. What's the next step for California? What does California do in order to pursue equal marriage rights?
Well, we need to get rid of Prop 8. And so that's going to take a lot of organizing. And in fact, there are a number of groups on the ground in California that are already doing the hard work that needs to be done in order to get us to a vote to take down Prop 8 if it requires that. And that work begins, of course, with very aggressive voter identification efforts. That's one thing. It also means media buys, all sorts of other efforts to try to change people's minds. And for example, the LA Gay and Lesbian Center has been doing grassroots sort of door-to-door conversations with people, first to identify potential voters who might be supportive of us so that we can make sure to get them out. But second, in an effort to change hearts and minds through those conversations, and I think it's been very successful. So those are efforts that we can support from out of California.
Okay. We have another caller on the line. You're on the air.
Yes, Miss. People talk about the right to be able to make medical decisions, or in terms of dealing with property, or the right to be in the room when their loved one is sick. They can have all that in terms. All they got to do is have power of attorney.
There are a few things that you can do by power of attorney, and some medical decision making, of course, is among those things, but there are other things that only a marriage license can do for you. And in fact, those are the vast majority of the hundreds and hundreds of rights that are available through state law. And just to give you one example, Illinois law is very clear that the only people who are authorized to make burial decisions, funeral decisions, are next of kin, and that is defined as spouses and blood relatives. And so if your blood relatives are hostile to your relationship, it doesn't matter how long your relationship was or how much you and your partner meant to each other. Your partner could be excluded from your funeral. Your partner could be excluded from the plans, to put your funeral together. And there are all sorts of others that are, I talked about the parenting issues before. Now, if you were married, you would automatically create visitation or custody rights by marrying a person who has a child, or by planning a child together. That presumption of parenthood would apply. Now, you can't do that if the couple's already broken up. Even if there is a real parent-child relationship there, that child knows the parent to be a parent. Without a marriage and the accompanying presumption of parenthood, that child really stands at risk of having that relationship severed here in Illinois. Those are just a few examples. There are, of course, also all sorts of state benefits that turn on marriage, and there are no amount of contracts that can ever get you those.
We have another caller. You're on the air.
Oh, hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Yeah, okay. This is more of a philosophical question. I was wondering, do you find it adequate, the modern heterosexual model adequate for, we're talking about gay people here, we're talking about two women or two men? Marriage has changed through the centuries. It's never been the same model. Now here we have gay people trying to adopt this heterosexual model for themselves. Is it really adequate, or because as an African American, we've had to make changes in some of the models that were presented to us and how to live here in America. Our own culture, we had to modify it to fit us.
That's a really thoughtful question. And I think you're absolutely right. Marriage is not for everybody. And the last thing we want to suggest is that we are making some sort of normative claim that everybody ought to get married, or that ought to be a goal for all people. But the fact is that some people do want to marry. Some gay people, some non-gay people. And marriage is connected to so many rights, so many benefits, and so many protections. And so many people understand marriage to mean a commitment between two people that is lifelong. And so many people aspire to that it has to be accorded equally to everybody. So you may not wish to marry, and that's absolutely great, and that may be the perfect decision for you, and other people may wish to marry, and that's absolutely great, and that may be the perfect decision for them. All we want is for everyone to have equal opportunities. And so that's, I think, what's at the heart of it. And I think you also made another interesting point, which is that marriage has changed a tremendous amount through the centuries. I mean, it isn't so long ago that women were considered property. Women had no legal personhood once they got married. And in fact, it was here in Illinois. A married woman tried to be a lawyer, tried to be admitted to the bar, and she was told, no, a woman's role is in the home, and a woman is not, a married woman has no legal personhood, so she can't be liable for debts. So how could you possibly take fees as a lawyer? Now we understand that marriage is supposed to be gender neutral, All that remains is to take that last one gender requirement out of our marriage laws. So it is a very interesting study to look at how marriage has changed.
I want to make sure that I get in. You referred to Illinois marriage law that's currently on the books. How can the decision in California affect what's happening here currently legislatively in Illinois?
Well, I think for all of us in the gay community and straight allies, what happened in California was a call to action. We cannot ever allow another Prop 8. That has to be the last loss.
Yeah.
It was a very devastating and painful loss. The fight in California, was something that people fought so passionately. It drained our resources as a community because it was an incredibly expensive battle, and we came so close to winning. We really did. If you look at how many people supported Prop 8 and compared it to the ballot initiative in 2000, we've gained almost 10%, I think, percentage points. I mean, that's really extraordinary. So we have done some good work, we've done some hard work, and we need to continue doing that. I think in Illinois, we've got a lot of work to do to change public opinion, to change hearts and minds. We've got to pressure the legislature to do the right thing. I think if we can get legislated equality in California, the legislature passed a marriage bill. It's not impossible. We should be expecting it of our legislature here, and continuing to do grassroots work.
A quick question before we have to wrap up. There's been a proposition thrown on the table, I'd say, that we do away with marriage altogether, and we have everyone have civil unions, and marriage becomes an entirely religious institution. Is there any hope of that happening in this particular case or any time in the foreseeable future, do you think?
Not in the lawsuit that we're talking about with respect to Prop 8 in California or with any other active lawsuit. I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, but I don't think it's realistic because for too many people, marriage is very, very important. And, we have an interesting system where the government regulates civil marriage. The government gives out licenses, and only the government can give out licenses. And you can go to a faith leader and get your marriage blessed, or you can get your marriage performed by a faith leader as an agent of government. But really, only the government is in control of that.
Right. We've been speaking with Camilla Taylor, Senior Staff Attorney for Midwest Office of Lambda Legal. A couple of wrap-up announcements before we go. First of all, want to mention again the day of decision action. Whenever the decision is issued by the California Supreme Court, there will be either a protest or a celebration at 7 p.m. in front of the Center on Halsted. Next is the anti-war, anti-occupation protest that's happening tomorrow, March 14th at noon. Again, that's at Marshall Boulevard and Cermak. It's a couple blocks away from the Pink Line L stop. Up next on the Gay Liberation Network agenda is our next meeting. That is the first Wednesday in April, April 1st, at the Gerberhardt Library, 1127 West Granville. Also, we have our next CAN TV television show, March 27th, same time, same place, 6:30 on Friday. And that's about it. Again, thank you for joining us today. If you want to know some more information about either the Day of Decision or Gay Liberation Network, visit our website, gayliberation.net and dayofdecision.org. Thanks, and we hope we'll see you next week.